What's up, you guys? Joe Dobby here, back at it again with another video for you, and this one's going to be a little bit more interesting. I've had a lot of back and forth, or heard of a lot of back and forth between some people's opinions on One Piece TCG and Digimon, because naturally we are a Digimon community, and with the release of One Piece, which is a very beloved franchise as well, there's a lot of hype surrounding the card game and the collectability of the card game, and its overall actually game mechanics versus Digimon. Personally, I don't think you should compare the two and instead just enjoy the two, but because there's a lot of comparisons and debates and discussions on both, I thought I'd kind of dive into both and see what the pros and cons of specific mechanics are, and just share my opinion on both card games and where I think the direction is going to go. First, let's dive into a background of both games. So they actually originate obviously from the animes respectively, like One Piece, where Luffy is a young pirate who sets off on a journey to find the One Piece and becomes the greatest pirate of all time. The anime is about to hit its conclusion, and it's at its peak currently. I'm still reading up on the manga. The early anime is super kind of like full of fillers, so I'm just reading the manga right now, trying to enjoy it myself. Lots of hype surrounding the anime bringing TCG players and One Piece fans together. A lot of the fan base from the One Piece anime will probably start collecting the cards, start playing the game, and start enjoying it, leading to a pretty large anticipated fan base. Now, same thing can be said about Digimon. The franchise has actually been a while around for about the same time as Pokemon has, and it's brought a lot of Digimon fans towards collecting the card game, eventually playing it and enjoying it. So Digimon, a group of kids get transported into the digital world full of digital monsters. They partner up with some of these Digimon to save both worlds from destruction. There's multiple seasons, there's card games, there's video games surrounding the Digimon franchise, and the TCG does a very good job of referencing all these things. And it's got mature themes, so more mature themes than Pokemon, but still obviously catered to a younger fan base, younger audience. But yeah, people and Digimon die, man. They don't just faint or get tired. Next, the Digimon card game was released in 2020 during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. It successfully still broke into the TCG market with great gameplay, beautiful artwork, and high card collectability. Tournament support via webcam games was actually pivotal towards the game's success over the course of the pandemic. In addition to that, as of 2021, ICV2's top 10 collectible card games actually puts Digimon in number 6, which has surpassed that of Dragon Ball Super and Cardfight Vanguard. Very, very big things. Like, we're up there in the top 6 along with Magic, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh!, and I think that's super awesome. So, mechanics-wise, the goal is to attack your opponent directly for a lethal blow, similarly into the anime, where some Digimon really just try to kill other Digimon and kill the tamers that are partnered with them. And players start with shields that actually protect themselves. They're called security, before getting hit with a lethal blow. And Digimon digivolve and grow stronger in the card game, much as very much so as with the franchise. So the One Piece TCG is to be released, I believe, in December of 2022. Demo decks and super pre-release events have led to huge hype behind the game. More in-person play now as well leads to easier access to enjoying the game at your local scene without having to invest in a webcam setup. So the lax restrictions actually leads to higher accessibility for this game for this franchise that is has a wide range of audiences who have enjoyed One Piece. There's a lot of great potential for sure. So basic mechanics: you control a pirate crew with a leader that has X number of life. The life is actually represented in the leader cards. So at the start of the game, if your leader has 5 life, you put 5 cards. Similarly in style as how you put your security in Digimon. And they also trigger effects. So those are completely at random as well. So that's kind of something that they both have in common. So There's a complaint between players that switch. Well, we'll cover everything later, but you're starting to see where I'm going with this, hopefully. And then once all life is spent, that is a lethal blow, and your leader is done for. So, mechanics. The first mechanic I wanted to dive into is the shared versus non-shared resources. So Digimon Memory Gauge is a shared resource of 20 memory overall between the two players that you have to pass to your opponent, signifying the end of your turn. So at the end of your turn, by giving, quote unquote, your opponent memory to use for their next turn. It's very simple, but it can also be constricting and limiting when used very well. So some players play decks that are very memory efficient. Some players play decks that are very memory heavy. However, the goal is to punish your opponent through triggers and security. There's all give and take in the card game that leads to a certain balance, which I think is nice. There's obviously a lot to work on here, but the memory gauge itself, I think, is a resource that will age very well as we go forward with the game. So the biggest pro here is you always have a play to make. Now, not every play is going to be a good play, and as TCG players, in our head, if we're not doing the most optimal play, our deck sucks, we're losing, this is the worst feeling ever, not satisfying, unenjoyable. But I mean, I would rather have a play to make than just not have a play to make because I can't find lands, for example, like in Magic, right? So you always have the ability to play memory, to play cards via memory usage. It's just passing too much memory, being a major con in the game, obviously, can be a huge boost to your opponent in the next turn, especially if they have a better hand than you do. So I can see some of the pain points there. However, I think this puts everyone at the mercy of a common resource, which limits how strong decks can ultimately be when both decks are playing at their best. That's just my personal opinion. Feel free to disagree in the comments. Now, for the One Piece resource, it's called a Dawn deck, right? So these Dawn decks have two goals. You can actually Dawn these cards on your characters and leaders to trigger certain effects. You can Dawn them to increase your leader and character's attack power, or just their power in general. And every turn, you gain +2 Dawn, if I'm not mistaken, based on how I've played the game. Maybe I'm playing it totally wrong, let me know. You actually gain 2 Dawn per turn, unless you're like the first player or whatever. It is an unshared resource. So one of the things that I find less cumbersome is the presence of an unshared resource that you don't have to search for. So in Magic, the biggest hindrance sometimes, for my experience, is not being able to find lands. Just having a quarter or even like a third or of your deck being full of lands. I think it's half your deck even being full of lands sometimes, is kind of crazy because you're just playing these cards with like habitats on them. Instead of really cool, like you get to play more cool character cards and stuff in other games. So this unshared resources that just automatically boosts you or gives you more opportunities per turn is nice. It allows for the game to flow very well and consistently across both players, kind of like across both of their experiences. Now, to my knowledge, this Dawn deck cannot currently be manipulated by your opponent. Like, you can't force your opponent to send Dawn back to their deck. You can't trash Dawn. You can't do anything like that. So you'll always have this consistent memory gain, or quote-unquote like Dawn gain. Now, you will always have a play you can make, and I caveat this with the word eventually, because you have to wait till you get enough Dawn to actually play cards. However, you can always declare an attack and use the Dawn that you've gained to boost your character or your leader's attack power, allowing you to safely have a swing at their life. But the issue with that is no, there's no issue with that. You're really just getting some swings in, which is kind of nice. Now, the main con of this kind of resource is there's no way to punish your opponent for gaining this. There's no way to punish your opponent, so you can't really slow them down by affecting the Dawn deck. And it may take a few turns as the active player to actually get to play or do something without just attacking your opponent's life with the leader, for example, because maybe some of your cards are too cost expensive to play and you have to wait a few turns before you can actually do that. Next, so another mechanic I wanted to go over is the security cards versus life cards. This is something that I never really understood. Some people's opinions on life cards is like, oh, I feel like when I get triggered by life in One Piece, it's not as bad as Digimon when I hit a security card, which is, yeah, that's it. But at the end of the day, both card games, players of both card games will be limited and at the mercy of these shields. I'm just gonna call them shields as a blanket for both terms, right? Whether it's security, whether it's life, you still have to get through it at the end of the day. How bad you feel from hitting something that might devastate you is going to affect you in both games. Especially as One Piece releases more cards. Like, we're a lot of sets into Digimon now, so there's a lot of threatening cards in security that some people quite honestly take advantage of, exploit. But that comes at a cost of having to play things that are super expensive, usually. Or that comes at a cost of you not being able to play anything, really, and just having to delete whatever your opponent has and outlasting them. So there's types of control decks that are like that in Digimon. In One Piece, I feel like eventually we'll start to see those things, but there's a lot of commonalities between you and your opponent's deck in One Piece that kind of limit that. Like, you both have leaders, you can both attack, and the leaders are pretty much, like, they can't be deleted to my knowledge, so it's pretty good. So between the two, Digimon security cards act as shields. The base security is 5, and this is where some people's pain points I start to understand, right? You can manipulate how much security you have. You can either increase security by recovery, or you can trash security, both yours and your opponent's, by certain effects. Now, increasing security can be a pain point for some players, for some decks. However, there's a lot of, like, it's, at the end of the day, all these security cards are highly RNG, and it is what it is. Pro, deeper strategy involved playing around these security effects. So maybe you want to have a wider board first, a safer board state before you start swinging. That way, if a security trigger deletes one of your other Digimon, you have another Digimon that you can attack with, or you're saving a Digimon on the board, that kind of thing. So this is a con that players find, you know, like the security being exploited and manipulated, i.e. security control decks. And some people might find it unfair or not enjoyable. But I think it's kind of an ingenious way to play Digimon. It's not always the best way to play Digimon, because I personally like the Digivolution aspect. I like the Digivolution from Trash. I like to associate myself more with the franchise as a whole when I play the game. But these decks do exist, and this versatility in deck building is very, very nice for me. So I can't complain about someone that builds SecCon, to be honest. One Piece life cards. So leader cards have life points equal to the amount of represented life, as I mentioned. To my knowledge, cannot be manipulated, either increased or decreased, only attacked into and removed. Some cards have triggers similar to Digimon. So like Who's Who and Gum Gum Red Hawk here. Now, the Pro can only be attacked by characters or leaders with the same attack or higher stat as the opponent's leader. So, for example, I have a 5,000 attack power Luffy that's going to attack a 5,000 power Kaido. Now, I have to have at least 5,000 attack power to actually attack for their life, for Kaido's life. And if I hit him once, we reveal one of those cards, and that's a life gone, you know? So that's one of the biggest pros, is like all decks are still able to declare an attack. And if you can't counter it, which we'll discuss in the next slide, you are still able to have an effect on your opponent's game state, potentially making them change their decisions, increasing pressure, even if you're kind of bricking or struggling. Now, a major con is kind of a pro to some people who have played Digimon, which I can see why you would want to make the switch in this regard, right? So because it cannot be manipulated, you're kind of just accepting your fate with your life cards. Like, whatever it is in there, that's all it is in there, and you just have to deal with it. So that's another layer of gameplay that could be introduced later on for One Piece, but right now I don't think it exists. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, because if I am wrong, ultimately all I have to say is this specific mechanic is fairly similar, so I wouldn't worry about it. Now, One Piece counter cards. So, this is a new mechanic that is not similar to Digimon. These are cards that can be played during your opponent's turn from your hand, right? You can use this to ultimately trigger various effects, like increasing the power of your defending character and leader to prevent deletion, or sometimes you can increase power and then delete one of your opponent's characters, which is kind of nice. Now, the biggest pro here is a deeper level of gameplay, as your hand becomes another defensive resource for you to manage. So you can consider yourself kind of big brain with managing your hand, because it becomes another resource. Just like in Digimon, you can use security as a resource. Your hand becomes an extension of your defensive plays, which is kind of nice. Good usage of counter cards leads to some satisfying defensive plays. So if you time your counter cards, if you time when you use them, you can feel good about yourself knowing that that one play may have led you to turning the game around. So good for you. Hand management is a very satisfying skill to master. And it's fun. It's really fun, because there is some interaction in between turns that do offer that level of unpredictability, which is nice. Now, the cons. Hand depletion for counter effects used as a blanket mechanic may reward decks that inherently increase hand size. This is just my personal opinion, right? Like, cards or decks or archetypes and colors that allow you to draw more, search more, pick up more cards from your deck, go through your deck more, in my opinion, will have an inherently better time in this type of card game because of the counter mechanic than other decks that don't. Because if every time I can attack, my hand size is so big that I can just spend as many counters as I'd like, then you're not really getting anywhere as far as your offense is concerned, right? So it's one of those things that I think Bandai has to take into consideration and in-game design, to ensure that every color has some form of increasing your hand size, at least. Some will obviously be naturally better than others, but not to the degree of you're just able to counter like every turn with no repercussions. So that's just one of those things that they have to keep an eye on, but I really like this mechanic. I think it's fun. It reminds me of Flesh and Blood, and I didn't like the art in Flesh and Blood, but I do like One Piece art, which is kind of why I'm going to dabble in this game. Next, RNG and randomness. So super big point of discussion for a lot of people here, which is really funny. But I just want to caveat that both games currently do not have a search your deck for X card like Irida in Pokemon. There's a lot of search your deck cards in Pokemon, which I think would be pretty bad for both card games, because the advantage is too great. Whether it's to pick up counter cards or to pick up like a specific evolution, searching your entire deck is kind of rough. So One Piece and Digimon are doing something right currently where it's just top deck search cards. Obviously, Digimon has more ways to look through things now. You can look through your trash, you can look through the top of your deck, and you can look through security. So Digimon consistency in this regard, in my opinion, is significantly higher. So I actually think there's less RNG involved in Digimon, because there's multiple avenues to generate consistency from. You can look at your security, you can look at your deck, you can look at your hand, you can look at your trash, and you can pick up cards from anywhere. The only thing you can't do is search your entire deck. If you're looking through your deck, you're top decking, revealing cards to pick up, which I think is healthy and good. Another thing that Digimon has that increases consistency, in my opinion, over One Piece is the Digivolution mechanic. So everyone here has at some point, even myself, has complained about the Digivolution mechanic. Not the mechanic itself, but the fact that I just don't have a rookie, or I can't Digivolve and take advantage of the draw, etc. But we still have this mechanic over One Piece, which allows us to draw more. And it's the one thing that all decks can do in the Digimon. You can all Digivolve and draw. And I think that increases consistency even further than what One Piece has. So I think in terms of randomness, there's less randomness in Digimon versus One Piece. However, the lack of mulligans can stifle your ability to have a decent, even just a decent first turn in Digimon. And because One Piece has mulligans, you can actually start the game off nice to the point where, like, you know, you can just draw off your top deck and still have a playable kind of like first few turns. In Digimon, if you absolutely brick and you can't have the presence of mulligans, it's kind of rough, because even with all of these consistency pieces, if you just can't start off with something to digivolve into or something to search with, you're kind of just out of luck, and you end up being very, very much behind. Which I can see why it's kind of frustrating for people. Personally, I'm indifferent when it comes to mulligans. I think we've seen time and time again that mulligans doesn't actually have too big an impact on the game currently. But if you have any examples, please let me know. I'd like to learn more about what your thoughts are on mulligans as a whole. Now for One Piece, the current avenues for consistency is just draw for turn, any draw effects that cards have, and top decking via search cards, like revealing top 5 cards of your deck, etc. So this is something that Digimon has, like all of these Digimon has, so, and more, which is why I think there's less RNG involved in Digimon. It's just that first turn, once again, that can really like ruin you kind of thing. And you know, mulligans in One Piece make opening plays feel absolutely less bad. In addition to that, like, you don't have to actually give your opponent so much memory to give them a huge boost, because you both have the same amount of resource and they are not passed on to each other. So because you have an exclusive resource kind of like pool that you can get from, and you can't affect your opponents, and you can't affect your opponents like negatively, then, you know, at the end of the day, ultimately at some point in the game, you'll be able to make good plays because you'll have enough Dawn, you would have drawn enough cards, assuming you haven't lost yet, kind of thing. It's a new game, so more consistency cards will eventually be released. But yeah, so far, I'm loving both games. Now, last thing, should you be worried as a Digimon fan, seeing all of your friends be like, I'm going over to One Piece right now, I'm switching, bye, I'm gonna play One Piece competitively, Digimon will be my friend's game, like all these things that you're hearing about. Digimon has its own fan base, to be honest, so there's gonna be a lot of people who are gonna stick to Digimon simply because they didn't grow up with One Piece. I did not grow up with One Piece, I'm sticking to Digimon, but I'm currently reading the One Piece manga, so that might change. But right now, I love Digimon, and this is definitely going to be a game that I'm going to continue to develop myself as a TCG player with. The card art is full of references from all content, whether it's video games, whether it's magazines, whether it's the Vital Hero. All these things Digimon pulls from and does a very good job of creating alternate arts, reference arts, that any Digimon fan will definitely appreciate. It's got game mechanics that, in my opinion, will age well. As we increase consistency pieces, that memory gauge will be less swingy and will be a little bit more important. I think the memory gauge will be more and more important as time moves on, because you're not going to be able to... There's going to be enough consistency pieces that you're not going to be able to keep putting your opponent at 7 to 8 memory every turn when you're absolutely bricked anymore, right? So I think that's a game mechanic that will age well and offer a huge rewarding layer of, you know, gameplay. And the Digimon TCG is just a great game, man. Like, just enjoy it. Players migrating to One Piece, obviously, they're going to One Piece because they love One Piece. They grew up watching the anime, they consumed the content, they collected, and they're really loving it. So that's awesome. You know, I'm glad that there's a card game for you. Or they've migrated to Digimon from another TCG, maybe Yu-Gi-Oh, maybe DBS, maybe Magic, and they just spend their bag on multiple TCGs. Now that is really awesome, and they're probably looking for a TCG to excel in, to do really well in, and to enjoy. And that's totally fine. Some people are card game players. They're not attached to any one franchise. They're attached to enjoyable mechanics and game mechanics, which I think is cool. The common complaints, I think we've addressed in the video already, but too much RNG. I honestly think Digimon has less RNG than One Piece right now, because One Piece, from my testing and from someone that I have played with who owns a card shop and has played at least 50 to 100 hours minimum of every card game under the sun, the fact that in One Piece currently you're really only going through a third of your deck versus being able to draw on Digivolve, use search cards, reveal the top 5 cards, etc. I think there is less RNG in Digimon currently. Which, you know, you might disagree, and that's fine. That's cool. Just let me know why you think that's the case, because I am curious. Common complaint is I always lose to security. Well, that's another point of why Digimon has less RNG, because you can manipulate your security in some decks to ensure that you have ways to punish your opponent for attacking into you and trying to win the game. So that's another point where RNG is decreased. And both games are at the mercy of their security and their life. So I honestly don't think this is an argument. Like, you'll always lose to security, but at the same time, like, if you hit a trigger that puts out Usopp or whatever, and Usopp has like what, 3k attack power, and you're able to Dawn 4 on Usopp, that's a 7k swing for lethal along with your leader. That could have been the one thing that cost you the game too, right? So I don't think there's an argument for this. And the no skill required complaint. Well, there's a lot of skill involved in multiple card games. It really just boils down to a lot of the variables of skill. Hand management, resource management, deck building, which is a huge skill that people undermine when it comes to security control decks, for example. And yeah, a bunch of other things. So personally, I don't think anybody should be worried. I think both games deserve the hype. And I think that once the hype of One Piece has kind of resolved a little bit post-release, and we get a few sets in, and we get deeper into Digimon, and Digimon becomes more complex, the player base will start to basically overlap even more this time around. We'll see a lot of Digimon dabbling in One Piece dabbling in Digimon, and both at a competitive level will start to stabilize. And I think we will have both very good, enjoyable games moving forward. So I'm very glad for the TCG community to have these games. Thank you guys so much for watching, and bye.